Today on the show, we have Kevin Lawton. Kevin Lawton is one of the most known faces in the warehousing and supply chain industry. He has been podcasting, um, teaching, has been in the industry, has been one of the bigger influencers out there. So I'm super excited to have him on the show, learn about his journey. Always listened to him interviewing other people, but this time I'm getting the opportunity to learn about him and his journey and what he thinks about different topics. So it's a personal pleasure, Kevin, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on, and happy to be talking to you as a guest this time around. Yeah.
Awesome. So Kevin, I know you started in the industry and then evolved your career from there. But can you start touching from where you started in the supply chain industry and what were those beginnings like?
Yeah, sure. So I think like a lot of people probably in the warehousing industry specifically didn't necessarily set out to be working in warehousing, right? I think a lot of us find ourselves just somehow falling into the industry in some way or another, and that was the case for me. I didn't go and get my education in supply chain or logistics or anything like that. Actually went to school for entrepreneurial studies, and I minored in arts administration and event planning, so pretty far away from supply chain in general. But then I graduated and I needed a job, and had a connection where they were looking to hire a temp contract role for an inventory control specialist. And I'm like, okay, well, that sounds interesting, and that's really where it kind of all started. So started in that role, and then a month or so in, they offered me a full-time position, became inventory control analyst at that. It was a book publishing company, actually, and that's really where I started to learn about distribution and warehousing and all of these things that are going on to move product throughout the supply chain. And I think, for some time I was definitely like, I don't know if this is like totally what I want to do with my with my life. Which now, fast forward, like it's like 14, 15 years ago, right? It's like, that seems like wild for me to say as someone that's so day to day involved in the industry. But I was still kind of like, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to do something different. But then after a little while, then I started to really enjoy it and kind of embrace it. And I think I liked like the problem solving, right? I liked that there was always something different happening. There was always something going on. It wasn't like the same thing in and out every day. And that really kind of, I think, continued to grow my interest. And at some point I was like, okay, I want to embrace this. And that's really kind of where I was like, okay, I'm going to explore further into this career.
Makes sense. So early on when you were starting, like, I think I can relate with it where, yeah, warehousing and supply chain in the beginning is not everyone's cup of tea. You really have to, it's an acquired taste. And
Sure.
in
Yeah.
that sense that you have to really, but as you go more and more into it, you kind of realize how important it is for, like any country or any, the world to serve, like work.
Yeah.
Supply chain is how we run the industry. And also economically, it's about 7 to 8% of GDP comes from just logistics. So it's a big part of, like how we live as well. So like going from like in inventory roles, QA roles, like what was that move like when you decided to move towards content creation and things like that? Like what kind of propelled you from being an industry professional to becoming an industry influencer?
Yeah. Well, I'll say I definitely didn't set out to be, I guess, an industry influencer, as you said. That was definitely not like my plan or the goal in any way. But when I got a little further in my career, I was, really like, okay, I can see this being long term, and I wanted to grow and evolve in my roles, and work my way up to leadership positions and things like that. And I was like, if I'm going to do that, like I need to level up my knowledge in a sense, right? So So I started to look around, like, how could I learn about different things? And I when I was growing up, like in high school and early college days, like I was really into this was like, early 2000s, to 2008 or so. I would say, like, I was very into like the sneaker culture. And I would get all my information about sneakers from like blogs and forums and things like that. So my natural inclination was like, oh, if I need to learn about some topic, like I'm gonna go find a forum or a blog about warehousing, right? And like, well, that wasn't as much of a common thing as like a topic like rare sneakers, right? So I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And I think partially I was probably looking myself for some kind of like creative outlet or creative project to work on. Um, so I'm like, yeah, let me start a blog about warehousing, right? I mean, like talk about these things, and we could talk about them in like a different way, a kind of cool way, and obviously, like, I would learn along the way because I'll be researching these things and looking up these things, and that was kind of the initial idea and the initial thought. And then I was in the middle of a big project, big warehouse move that I'd been hired for, and we were going from like paper picking to Dematic multi-shuttle system with G2P pick stations and multiple different zones, non-conveyables, conveyables, voice picking, and a huge project. And I was quickly kind of like, whoa, like I don't have time to sit down, write, edit, and then just figure out how to even like get this out into the world. And at the time, my boss, I had known him for a while. We worked together at like 3 different companies actually. And he's actually guest number 2 on the podcast if you ever want to check that out. But yeah, he was kind of like, oh, I hear podcasts are becoming a thing. And this is like, it was like 2017, 2018 maybe. And I had never listened to a podcast. So I'm like, that sounds interesting. Like that might be a little easier. Like just sit down and talk versus like, type it out and then have to edit and make sure my grammar is correct and all these things. And so I'm like, maybe that's an option to do this. And so I started to explore that a little more. And then I'm like, okay, let me let me try this and like see how it goes. And so finally got everything together. I guess beginning of 2019, and yeah, put out the first episode. I think it was March of 2019 actually. So we're going on like 6.5 years now, going on 7 into the beginning of next year. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you shared it to me offline as well. But yeah, it's like I believe you're at your 1,000. Like, have you already crossed 1,000, or you're at 2,000? Like, how many episodes?
Oh, episodes. We're not at 1,000 yet. Like our core, our main podcast that comes out now twice a week, Monday and Wednesdays. Where I want to say we just released episode 630, 631 as today, actually, as we're recording this. But in total, I mean, we're probably well into 700 some different podcasts that have been recorded between like conference sessions and special kind of episodes series that we've done along the way too. So yeah, so definitely quite a few conversations. And I will say, like, my goal is like just for me to learn personally, and I think I've well accomplished that. And now it's like great to be able to help other people learn as well through the content.
Yeah, definitely. And I know you're in academia as well. You teach at Rider University. Like, how
Mhm.
did that come across? Like, were you interested in always teaching, or
No.
like did got it?
Yeah, no. No, I never thought I would be a teacher. Like that's for sure. And yeah, it came up uh kind of just out of nowhere, like serendipitously, I guess. And I was, as I mentioned, like, I was looking for different ways to learn and things like that. And on that kind of journey and discovery process of like, where can I learn more about warehousing, right? One was like, okay, I'm going to create something myself. But another was that I found ASCM, Association of Supply Chain Management. At the time was still Apex. And they have certification, certification, logistics, transportation, and distribution, which if you see my name on LinkedIn at the end is CLTD, that's what that stands for, right? So, so I went and got that certification, but also in doing so, I got involved in my local ASCM chapter here in New Jersey, ASCM PRSJ, and we actually had a relationship with my alma mater, which is Rider University here in Lawrenceville, New Jersey, and so naturally I was kind of like, oh, that's interesting. Like I want to be a part of like that relationship. How can I get involved more? And so I started working on like how do we develop better relationships with these supply chain major students. An interesting note is that when I graduated from Ryder in 2010, like supply chain as a major was very new. Like that was the first year that people graduated as a major for supply chain. So when I was like going into college, I don't even think I realized like this is a thing, right? Or this is a major, something that you can like focus on. So it's very interesting, like talking to those students and creating that relationship. So in doing that and building those relationships, I got to know the head of the supply chain department. And we just got to know each other, and he would come to some events, and we would try and help the students. We try and help them get awareness around internships, and started a mentorship program for the students so they could connect with supply chain professionals that have been in the field for a few years or longer in some cases. And so we developed that rapport, and over time, I guess, he knew of my career experience, and they had a professor that was retiring, and the professor taught management information systems for global supply chain, which had a big focus on ERP and SAP specifically. So when I worked for Keurig Green Mountain, I was a part of their transition from Oracle to SAP. So I had experience there, and he knew that. So he just randomly reached out one day and was like, we have this course, and I know that you have some experience with SAP. Would you ever be interested in teaching? And I'm like, teaching? What? Like it's not something that I really ever thought about. But at the time, I was looking to kind of step out from working for somebody else and like looking to do my own thing. And there was a couple things at play there that were pushing me towards that and opportunities. And so I looked at the teaching thing, and it came kind of like right at that point where I was like thinking about making this kind of decision of, jumping off the entrepreneurial cliff, so to speak, right? And so I'm like, this could be, like an interesting, just little contingency, extra little guaranteed, income to help out in this transition a little bit. So I'm like, you know what, like I'll try it. Like I'll give it a shot. And that's how it kind of came about. And now I'm in the middle of my, I guess this is my ninth semester. So I guess I like it, you could say. Yeah.
But I mean, in that sense, you can say you're Professor Kevin, right? Like,
Yes.
ninth
Yes.
semester.
Yeah. 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 Well, my students, it's Professor Lawton until they graduate, and then they can call me Kevin after that. So yeah.
Got it, got it. I'm guessing like through teaching, like initially it's a change, right? Like teaching a class,
Mhm.
teaching younger kids who might or might not have the motivation on that particular day to learn. Like how did you
Yeah.
like it's a mindset shift is what I would look at it as. Like what was that mindset shift for you where you were stepping into academia, you had to teach people, you had to make sure that they grasp the thing and like use it for their immediate assignments as well as take it forward in the career, because in a way you're creating future supply chain professionals, right? So
Mhm.
you have in that way a responsibility to kind of make sure that they are learning the best they can. Like, so what was that transition like for you when you started teaching?
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely a big transition because that was not, I mean, teaching was not something that like, as I said before, it was not something like that I had thought about. So, it was a big mindset shift because it was not something that like Ooh, I had it in the back of my head, and I had thought about like, ooh, if I ever teach, like I would do this or I would do that. It was kind of like I had to figure out how to do that. And as someone that was, managing warehouse employees and staff and things like that, it was it's very much different than leading a team in like an operational setting versus like leading a classroom of students, right? So there was a definite shift there, a little more leniency. I think I had to bring into my mindset, but I kind of it's been interesting because it's evolved. Like I think the students understanding awareness and interest in supply chain since when I started in I think it was fall of 21 now to like fall of 25. In fall of 21, I mean, it was like a very there was very little like awareness, even though the students were, and I would say like my class, not all of them major in supply chain. Like they have some other business majors that get mixed in there too. Um, but like even the ones that were majoring in supply chain, like their awareness around supply chain was like very low, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
compared to today, where like they come in and they're really, really aware, right? Which I think kind of is telling for society's view on supply chain and how that's increased.
Yeah.
But the mindset shift, yeah, was definitely like it was interesting because it was like, how do I, get these students to be interested in this topic, right? Like, how do we make this interesting? How do we make this, exciting? How do we make it fun in a sense? So bringing a lot of different kind of uh, experiences and like hands-on type of learning is really helpful. But I also found that, drawing from my personal experiences, like what I've actually seen happen in supply chain and like what the real world is like versus like, the academic view of the world really resonated with the students, and bringing more of that into the fold has certainly, I think opened their eyes a little more, and been able to get them to kind of latch on and really understand like the practicality of some of these supply chain applications in the world.
Makes sense. I mean, you're bringing them real world experience from your own experiences, and now I'm guessing since you also meet like so many people, you're able to kind of give them case studies for them to understand.
Yeah.
I relate to the fact that people have more understanding of supply chain than it used to be. So I graduated my grad school in management information systems back in 2015.
Okay.
We had courses on financial accounting. I mean, it has nothing to do with information systems, but giving that business domain experience is part of having a even a information systems degree. So we had like financial accounting, but we didn't have supply chain back then. Like as you were speaking, I was thinking like, did I had like supply chain?
Yeah.
So I think it has recently changed. Back in 2015, even the curriculum was not designed around all right. Supply chain is also. I don't think many colleges still have like an MS in supply chain, which they should.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, it's still fairly, I mean, just in general, like it's still fairly new kind of like major or focus for a degree. But I will say like our university now, because I've also now added intro to supply chain. I teach as well in addition to the MIS class, and they've recently made that intro actually mandatory for business students, which is pretty interesting. And that is like a very interesting mix of students because you have people that are like, I'm a marketing major. Like, what does supply chain have to do with me, right? Which I'm like, oh, I'm gonna tell you what it does have to do with you. But yeah, I mean, I think it is still like, even though it's so like as you said in the beginning, like it's it's such a big part of like our world. There's still like a lack of awareness and like the impact that overall and the focus that should be on there. I think from like a overall education perspective.
yeah, definitely. I mean, I think COVID was able to shed some light on it, where the
Yeah.
supply fell off. That's when people I think realized what supply chain is. I think e-commerce also plays a better role for people to now understand what supply chain is because obviously things are getting delivered to your home now. So I think they are able to kind of see or understand. All right, this is how things are moving in a supply chain. So yeah, definitely. I mean, the number of people who understand the basics of it has increased. But yeah, it wasn't the case previously. It was more like a back end industry where like people are
Mm.
operating, people, but not a lot of people were, like trying to be in that major or trying to be in that industry. Like you find yourself there, you never plan to be there. But I think now it's changing. A lot of people now see that, all right, I want to be in supply chain to start off with. Um,
Yeah.
awesome. So, moving to like your the other interesting thing that I wanted to talk about your career was that you're also an advisor to a lot of AI vision startups. Like, what role do you think, um, like as an advisor, like you play for these companies? Specifically, I think you're an advisor at Comet AI. I'm sorry if I pronounced it wrong. Is it Comet or is it Comet?
Kemet. Yeah.
Comet AI, and then Retina Robotics. So, like, what role do you play there? Like, what is your experience like working with, startups and advising them?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, it's an interesting time. I mean, it has been an interesting time for the last few years in our space because the technology is just moving so rapidly, right? And I think that, and not just in our space, but just in general, right? In
Mhm.
just the world, technology is just, I mean, it's insane at this point, right? Like some of the things, like, I just turned 38 last week, right? So some of the
Congratulations.
things that are like, thanks. So some of the things that are, happening now from a technology perspective, like when I was a little kid, like if you would have told me like, some of these things are happening, like humanoid robotics, right? Or even like, self-driving cars when I was a little kid, like I probably would have been like, oh, like that's not gonna happen like in my lifetime, right? And it's happening now, which is pretty wild to think about. And it's just rapidly evolving. But what I think is happening specifically in kind of warehouse logistics space is that, people are developing these technologies, they're coming up with these ideas and solutions, different, and they're looking for practical applications. Like, okay, yeah, we can, show this robot doing this type of action, right? But how does it actually like become a business, right? How do we commercialize this? Like, where do we find a home for this to make sense? And a lot of it is finding, homes in like logistics and warehousing, right? And a great case for that is I forget the name of the project off the top of my head, but there's like a defense like project, right, where like, they put out this challenge like for robotics and different technology, like how can you solve this, how can you solve that, and a lot of companies that we see in our space now have kind of like come out of that over the years because they find like, oh well, we can sell a solution like this to do movement of products, right, or packages. And but what happens is that I think a lot of those teams, they end up, being heavy on the tech side, but they don't necessarily have someone that has like the on the floor experience, right? And I think that's where sometimes, they try to build out the solution, and there's the thought that like, yeah, this is going to be a game changer, right? And it's going to do all that stuff, and then they get it to someone that like a warehouse manager. The warehouse manager's like, like this isn't really like the problem that I'm so worried about, right? Like it doesn't really move the needle for me. Or they get it out there and they're like, yeah, this is a problem for me, but like the solution won't work because X, Y, and Z, right? Because this is the reality of like how the operation runs, and so there's a little bit of disconnect there where you see, they go and now all of a sudden like they have to reiterate, right? They have to pivot, right? So like, how can you avoid that from happening? And I think, my experience being on the floor, right, and having an understanding about operations work and flow and all those different things, combined with, the unique experience of just naturally talking to so many people in the industry through the podcast, allows me to kind of bring them some additional insights and perspective on, not only like what I've seen personally like throughout my career, but also like, what are other people like struggling with and what are other people seeing in the industry. And that's kind of like what I've brought to them as an advisor, to help them give some guidance on that. And then also, from a network perspective too, is like, how do you get out there? How do you talk to the right people and things like that? And obviously, just naturally doing 700 some different conversations through the podcast. That's just recorded, right? So you can imagine how many conversations are not recorded in addition to that, right? Like, just bringing kind of that network and industry knowledge to them.
Makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they must be getting a lot out of it because you have real experience being on the floor as well as you talk to a lot of leaders who are actually operating warehouses. I feel like AI and like robotics in general are at the same stage where software was like 20 years ago, where
Mm,
you put software in somebody's hand, you need to teach them, you need to tell them how to operate it, use it, and there's a resistance from a business user who doesn't come from a technical background. That the amount of time that I would have to invest in learning it is going to be more than that. So I think robotics would also have similar kind of big pushback that, hey, are you adding work to my plate or are you reducing work to my
mm,
plate by like having me now also learn how to use a robotics? Also, there's a lot of like um, edge use cases for every warehouse. Not every warehouse is same. Every warehouse is set up a little bit differently. So how do
yeah.
you build a certain robot or any application or a humanoid which you can move from one warehouse to the other without having to spend like thousands of dollars recustomizing it. So I think it's still not. Obviously, there are some early companies that have got some traction, have gained some revenue, but I don't know if it's at a stage where you can commercialize it and say that it's a very profitable industry. I think it's lopsided right now, where it's like space industry, right? Like you spend so much money in the
Mm,
beginning for 5 7 years, where you're just spending money to get it to a point where at some point it would become viable and commercial to be able to use it. The other thing I would say is like if you do it like for single use cases. So I believe I've seen one of your podcasts where you were talking to somebody from Fox Robotics, where I think they have
oh, sure.
I think they have forklift robotics where they're just taking pallets in and out. I think that's one single use case you can train a robot to do. It's very confined. You're just looking at a rectangle and you have to get things out of there. Whereas some people are trying to do like this robot can do everything, and I think that's much harder to do than just having like singular use cases that this robot just does this, like this picks this from the other place to the other, and somewhere it works, sometimes it doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think you had a lot of great points there. And yeah, and yeah, shout out to Fox Robotics. They're right by you actually in Austin, if you didn't know that. But yeah, the spectrum is just so large right now, right? And like the different solutions and what's available and it's a very complex thing to
Mhm.
navigate for somebody that doesn't have the experience, right? That's, going and looking and, thinking like, okay, well, we need automation, we need robotics. Like we're starting to understand that, we need that to adapt and survive into the future of like what work is going to look like. And there's a lot of driving factors behind that. But, for those people that are just kind of like are looking for that first project, like it is hard because there's just so many options, right? Like, where do I go? Like, what do I go after first? Like, what kind of thing do I do? And then when I decide, like, what process am I going to go after first? Like, well, then there's, like 10 companies that are focused on that process. Like, which is the one that I pick, right? Like, oh, this one looks like this one. It's a different color, but like,
Yeah.
like, what's the difference really? Right? And so I think that can be daunting for businesses to kind of get over that hurdle at first, right? And then to your point too, it's like, well, what's the learning curve, right? Like, do I need to hire somebody that's just like a specialist in robotics to be able to look after this, or can I just have a supervisor manage this or take care of this? Like, what does that look like? And I think that barrier is lowering, and I think the solution providers are starting to understand that more because obviously, we all see the news like Amazon has, some crazy amount of robots like deployed right in their operations, and obviously they got the cash to play around with that and experiment, right? But as that, kind of top of the market, right, starts to get so penetrated with all these different solutions. And now, like, it's like, well, how do we move down market into the mid market, small business? Like, how do we focus solutions for them that are attainable, not only from like a financial perspective, but also from a simplified deployment, simplified operation, and understanding of those solutions. And like, how do we make that easy for them so like they can bring it in and they can get it going right away, and they can see impact right away? Because some of these SMBs, right, I mean, they can't wait like years to necessarily get an ROI, right? They need to see something. And then that's going to allow them to feel more comfortable and allow them to go after the next project and the project after that. And before you know it, like, they're on their way to, getting as automated as possible and optimized. But there is kind of that. And obviously there's missteps too in the industry, right? I mean, see, people have a bad deployment, automation or robot doesn't quite work out the way they thought it would. So, it gets put in the corner and collects dust. And now they're like, well, we're not going to look at any other solutions, right? So there's responsibility there on both sides. Like the solution providers, they got to deliver on, what the expectation of the customer is, and they got to support too, like beyond, and make it easy for the end user to digest and work with. And that's going to help with like kind of the lowering of the barriers for the future even more as well.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's like the barrier to understand it has to be as lower as possible. Just like in the software world, we have like interoperability, I guess, right? Like if you have a certain kind of robot, put it integrate with my WMS, put it integrate with my overall process. So I think like, solution providers need to think about how would it not just fit as an isolated product that I'm building, but how would it fit in an overall ecosystem of softwares and tools and processes that a particular warehouse facility has. So I think that I think is a challenge as well. I mean, I think in case of touching on like what you said about Amazon, right? I think Amazon has an advantage not just because of the capital they have to invest in robotics, but it's
Sure.
also because of their standardization. Everything that they do is very standardized to their own norms, so they don't have to work with external requirements of hey, this brand acts like this. Doesn't really matter to them. Everything has to act like in Amazon's WMS, IMS, shelves, barcodes. So they have that advantage of scaling robotics because they get to decide how they want to set up a facility with
Mhm.
respect to how they want their robots to work and whatnot. Secondly, I think training staffs, and they've had an advantage where I think they were one of the first people who were setting up fulfillment centers at scale. So they have that time advantage as well. So standardization I think is important, like to be able to kind of do it, but then at the same time SMBs would not find a lot of value in it, as you said, right? If you talk to warehouse operators, they are always short on time. At least that's what my
Mhm.
so if you have to show them immediate value to be able to get their attention, otherwise there's so much on their plate already that nice to have things don't make make their way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I love that point about standardization, because it's such a great point. Because if you're somebody like Amazon, and you can tell like pretty much anybody, like, no, you got to do it our way, right?
Yes.
Because they have so much power, like, and influence there. But if you're Joe's 3PL that's got like one 40,000 square foot location in Pennsylvania or something, like, you're not going to tell, like, and all of a sudden, let's say like Kraft like calls you up and is like, hey, we need help with fulfillment of this product. You're going to be like, okay, we'll do whatever you want us to do, right? Because it's like a huge account for them.
Mhm.
So I mean, that's such an interesting point. I mean, it's a great point. I love that.
Yeah. Think especially when you're dealing with so much technical complexity, like standardization just makes it easier for you to scale because then you don't have to worry about how you would change the underlying architecture or the
Mhm.
systems. You're just worried about innovating on already like on a good foundation versus how would I make a good foundation with the complex 4 or 5 brands that I'm trying to put together with their multiple requirements. Um, in this robotic scheme of things, have you seen like two questions, not just one question, but one, like
Sure.
what is like if you can share an example of a facility or a organization where you've seen that, hey, these folks are the they're at the cutting edge of robotics and they're leading. So what does that warehouse operations look like? And in that operation, have you seen reverse logistics being handled by robotics and things like that?
Yeah, interesting. I will say that a facility where I saw like really impressive kind of setup and not only thinking about like now, but like forward looking as well. I got a chance to tour a CVS distribution center here in New Jersey, and they were leveraging like they had an auto store system in there. They had Tompkins T sort that was dealing with that. They had a big robotic arm that was moving pallets and handling like palletization of cases, and they were using a separate kind of tower for like the totes that they send to the store for storage to kind of stage them and queue them up. And when I saw that, that was like fairly new. This was probably maybe this was 2 years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. But that was like fairly new setup for them. But that was certainly something that I thought the systems that they had paired together were really smartly done, and they were had plans to continue to evolve upon that. But basically, they were putting all the products that are either going to go out e-commerce or go to the stores in the auto store, and then they were working on developing. They hadn't quite got it running yet. At the end of the auto store, they were working on robotic arms to pick out of the totes as well, which I'm sure by now they've either figured it out or they either scrapped it, depending on which way it went. And then that would go into the Tompkins T-sort trays, and those trays would then go into the various totes depending on where that product, what store it was going to, right? And then those totes would come off and they would go onto a conveyor line. They would ride up and then get scanned and everything, and they would go into like a staging tower, fully automated. And then when it was ready for that store to go, they would get pulled out and they would get put onto pallet and palletized, and then shipped over and I guess out to the store, right? So really interesting flow there. That was one I think is really cool to see that in operation and how that worked. And I would say like they were really looking at kind of like what is the next phase of our distribution operations and how are we approaching that. So that's one that really stands out to me. That was impressive because it was one that was like operational and they had fully thought out, and there were multiple different systems kind of interacting with each other and figuring out that full process flow there end to end. I mean, some of the other ones that are interesting and cool, like I didn't see this one in person. I will say I just recently learned about it. We had Daifuku on the podcast with Jason Griswold was the guest, and he was talking to us about this ASRS system that they made for Peterbilt, the trucking company. And when he started telling me about it, I'm like, this thing sounds wild. Like, I have to see what this looks like. And they basically built an ASRS large enough to carry truck bodies, right? So, like the cab of the truck, essentially huge, right? Huge type of item and product. And so, huge, like, system just to be able to handle like that weight and the movement of products that large. But on top of that, they built it on top of their manufacturing facility. So like 50 feet in the air, basically in like what was like an attic storage space previously. And it's pretty wild. I posted the video on my LinkedIn about it, but it's pretty crazy to see and just think about from an engineering perspective, like how they supported that and how they built that out, like while not disrupting the operations happening underneath it. It's pretty impressive project. So those have been like two that have kind of stood out to me. But I've certainly seen a ton of different stuff, like people where they're operating Locust Boss or Six River, all those different types of things, and various ASRS systems as well. But from a reverse logistics perspective, I can't say that I've seen any operations where they're utilizing that yet. I mean, I think probably on a like a back to stock end, like they do the inspection process, and then like maybe they're throwing that back into like an ASRS or something like that, or utilizing something like an AMR to transport that back to a location. But I haven't really seen any application where robotics or automation are being leveraged, like from the, I guess, initial kind of inspection processing perspective.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think I would agree. There are a lot of solutions out there. It's still in a research phase where it's getting used in something that even we are prototyping is Vision AI, where you're
Mm,
not using it to kind of move things physically, things, but inspect things where you can standardize that this is grade A, this is grade B, this is grade C, not based on a human decision making, but based on your Vision AI algorithms that this is what a grade A mobile phone looks like. This is what a grade
mm.
B looks like. This is what a grade C looks like. So definitely, I mean, I haven't seen like robotics application in the reverse logistics world other than just moving things as you would. Um,
Yeah, I think it's hard, right? I mean,
yes.
because there's so much. You look at like a regular pick, an order pick, right? Like, I mean, the product should be essentially the same every time, right? But like when you get into reverse logistics and returns, like you don't know what that product is going to look like. Essentially, like, is it going to be destroyed? Is it going to be dirty? Is it going to be in a totally different box than it got shipped out in? Like you don't really know. So I think that's like hard. But I think the vision application certainly has some potential there for sure.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, in reverse logistics, they say that, like when you're sending products out, like forward,
Mhm.
you know what you're sending, but when you're
Yeah,
getting return, you don't know what you're getting. You can get
it's kind of
anything.
blind. Yeah,
You
yeah,
get all kind of things, especially with the fraud increasing. The reverse logistics industry is going through a fraud cycle as well.
mm,
The overall industry and the problem is about $900 billion. Dollars. Out of that, 14% is return fraud. So it's like
mm,
you would buy a shoe, like they would buy a shoe, but they would send their old shoes.
yeah,
That kind of stuff. So fraud is a big problem, and I think that's where Vision AI can play a big role because um, half of the challenge with dealing with returns, at least from what I understand, is the labor that you have to invest in it. By the time you have somebody open the box, inspect it, put it back into the shelf, you've already ate the entire margin. So it's said that
yeah,
about 30 to 40% of the MSRP of a retail product goes into returning and reshelving the product. So which kind of propels a lot of retailers that why should I even reshelf it if at my own dime? And that's where I think automation and Vision AI might play a big role in the future.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's definitely opportunity there. I think it's just it's a complex problem to solve, right? And I think it's really interesting. Like I tell my students, like I'm like, oh, do you ever go to return something and they're just like, oh, just keep it and we'll send you like a new one, right, or something like that. I'm like, do you ever
Mhm.
think like that's just crazy? Like this company must be losing money. How could they just send me another one for free, right? And I'm like, well, the return cost probably costs more than like the product even costs itself, right? It's not even worth it, and it's very interesting because a lot of them don't realize that, which I think a lot of probably a huge percentage, unlike us who work in the industry and get that, like the average consumer like has no idea probably what goes into a return or what's involved in that, and I think if we had more awareness around that, we probably maybe we could reduce the amount of returns in a sense, but I think that's a big mountain to climb, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a lack of understanding of like the costs involved with it. Um, it's seen as more of a back office problem. It's not like it's not
Mhm.
the most, it's not seen as the biggest problem in the supply chain, but with the returns increasing, with the e-commerce, as well as with this, tariffs where people would sometimes hoard on products and then they would be sitting on too much overstock. Those things are actually bringing a lot of light on this, because a retail business has 5-6% margins. That's it. Like, you max, I mean, if you have 10% EBITDA, you're doing really well. And if your return rate is about 20%, 25%, then you're slashing it in half or eating it all away. So it's really impacting bottom lines now, like more than it used to before COVID, when people used to shop a lot lesser online. So yeah, it's a growing industry and a pain point for warehouses as well. Like, I feel like it's not just a financial pain point, but it's a space problem as well. Like, if you're sitting
Oh
on too
yeah.
much stock, then you don't have the space to get the stock that is actually moving. So, and at the same time, the team that is managing the facility is getting burnt out that, hey, why am I dealing with all this stock and it hasn't moved for so long?
Yeah, that's like nobody wants to touch that. A warehouse is usually like tucked away somewhere in the corner, and that's I mean, I managed the returns department for a little while in my career, and we were always like the first to pull resources from when like picking needed extra help, or like they needed somebody else on the assembly line in this operation. And we would always be like short, and then the returns people would be like, why do they keep pulling us? Like, we have all these returns here we need to process, and it's just building up, and all these things. And it's it's usually not a pretty department to be involved in, but it's a critical one when you really realize like the impact it could potentially have on your business.
Yeah, definitely. And it's also, I think the mindset right now, like, which I think could shift in the future, and I'm writing an article about it specifically, is that you don't need to sort them back. You just need to reject them. So you're not looking to what
Mm.
you want to put back. You want to know what you want to reject and put into the recommerce or liquidation pile. So it's like that way you're moving faster. You're not trying to open every box. You've already sort of decided that, all right, opening it is going to cost me more. So
Mm.
instead of sorting, invest in like how would you reject, and like find partners who you can move them through in a brand safe way. Um, there's a lot of facilities that are popping up in the 3PL industry that are especially based on reverse logistics. Their entire role is that we
Okay.
are, and maybe, I mean, I would love to hear from you. Like, have you seen those facilities where a 3PL is just around that, hey, I don't do forward movement. All I do is accept
Mhm.
returns for on behalf of my brands and clients, and I resort them. Maybe I dry clean them. Maybe I do something about them, and maybe you sell them again on your first party channels, or maybe you're selling in used good markets. Like, have you seen that experience where like 3PLs like that?
Yeah, definitely. I think there are some people out there that like specialize in that specifically. Like a big one, like we just had on the podcast recently was Happy Returns. Actually, like, I mean, they're enabling returns drop offs at like all across the country. And I before I had the podcast, I wasn't exactly sure like how they operate on like an operational level, but they're essentially just taking the product back, enabling like that customer drop off to be easy. And then they have, I think it's three, like basically sort facilities in throughout the country, and they're just sorting those returns and then shipping them out to like either the 3PL that works for like the brand, or the brand directly, and then it's up to the brand to do the inspection, stuff like that. But they're like kind of that consolidation point, which is, I imagine, is reducing the cost for like getting those returns back, and making it more efficient from a logistics cost perspective. So that's one, definitely. And then like Maven Circular is
Mhm.
another one. Nate
Yeah, I
and
think I've seen.
Jess, yeah. And they're pretty much, I think they do some regular fulfillment as well, because they have some clients I think that have requested both type of services. But they are very much like heavy focused on like looking at processing returns, like doing recommerce rework projects, and things of that nature. Another one down in Texas, actually, too, is Pattern. Pattern with a U. They do all that kind of recommerce processing as well. And then they do like secondary marketplace selling for, I think, the brands that they work with as well. And actually, there's more than I thought of initially. As I'm talking here, then there's like the return down in Houston, Texas too as well. Brian and team over there. Like I've been to their operation before, and it's pretty wild. It's like the amount of volume of returns that they push through that facility, and that's pretty much all they're doing in there. Like they're just taking in returns, processing them, and then they do some like recommerce work as well, which is really interesting, like to learn the details kind of behind some of that stuff. And then there's another one. I forget the name of her company, but Courtney is her name, and they do a lot of kind of rework type of stuff as well, like a lot of dry cleaning, like and things of that nature too. So there's definitely ones out there that are focused like specifically on that, and it's it's not necessarily a pretty business to be involved in, but certainly I think it's one that is much needed and can be a huge value add for brands when you think about the amount of inventory that you can potentially get back into circulation and sell again, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, in addition to these facilities, I think there are avenues that need to be created so that people who are selling online are able to find a place to even return it. Because in many cases, they're expecting that, hey, my forward 3PL itself is going to take care of it. Whereas the forward 3PL is not set up for that kind of work. So
Yeah.
they're paying storage on returns that they are not getting processed and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, these facilities are really helpful. Like these return facilities are really helpful when you're dealing with like high ASP items. So I'm guessing like, I mean, if it's $1,000 dress, it makes sense that you dry clean it and you put it back on the shelf versus just saying that, hey, it's a return. But if it's a $5 item, $6 item, it doesn't really make sense to even open it or even take it back from the
Yeah.
customer. It's you rather just leave it and give it to a reseller or an eBay seller for them to sell in a brand safe way. Of course, like if you're a big brand, you want to make sure where the product is landing. But sometimes it's better not to touch it than touch it. Is what I feel.
Yeah.
I think what I preach at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say I just looked real quick. Courtney is at Renewal Logistics. I don't want to cut her short there. I want to give her the proper shout out. Yeah.
100%. Kevin, this has been really insightful and really fun chatting to you, like learning about you, your career, like what you've done. And I mean, I'm an avid fan of your podcast, so it's I'm super, like I'm happy that I was able to have you on my show.
Yeah, of course. I appreciate you having me on, and always happy to talk about the industry, whether it's recorded or not.
Kevin, thanks for your time again. Where can people find you?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. And you can find us on any podcast platform that is out there. Just search for the New Warehouse podcast, and you can connect with me on LinkedIn, and definitely check out our YouTube channel as well at the New Warehouse.
100%. We'll add them in the notes as well. Although I know most people who would see this would already know you. So
at least one more would be great,
Yes,
Sure.
that's for sure. Like you'll have more people, especially from the recommerce and the reverse logistics side of things. So yeah, appreciate the time, Kevin. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.